Welcome everyone to Catalio Conversations, where we talk to founders and CEOs across innovative healthcare and AI who are building the next generation of disruptors in the space, from drug discovery to autonomous labs to clinical intelligence and beyond. I'm your host, Martha Petrocheilos, and with me today is Lyn Baranowski, the CEO of Avalyn Pharma, a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company that is developing targeted inhaled therapies for patients with rare lung diseases, such as pulmonary fibrosis, by taking proven medicines and reformulating them so that those can be delivered directly into the lungs, aiming to improve both efficacy and to reduce systemic side effects. Lynn, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's such a treat to be here. Thank you for having me, Martha. Great to meet you.
Absolutely. Let's start us off with taking it back to the beginning for a bit. You've spent more than 2 decades in respiratory, Novartis, VCC. You've done leadership at Pearl before it was acquired by AstraZeneca for more than $1 billion. COO at Altavant. Respiratory has been the protagonist throughout your career. So when did rare lung disease become more than just an area you worked in and more of the thing you wanted to keep building companies around?
Yeah, it's a great question. It actually dates back to my earliest time in industry. I started working in Novartis after business school, and in those years, found my way into a role in the respiratory therapeutic area, doing business development work. So I was a person on the team that was helping Novartis think about how we might grow our business and what else we might do in that therapeutic area, because we as a company were launching a drug called Xolair, which is still on the market right now for severe asthma. I got to know some of these rare diseases, and particularly pulmonary fibrosis. At the time, there was literally nothing approved for the disease. It's a disease that affects patients in very dramatic ways. So once you're diagnosed, survival in the disease is only about 3 to 5 years. I just got to know about the patient burden and how little there was available for patients. And the market has changed dramatically over the course of my career in the space, but it is still the case that it's just unbelievably high unmet need, and there's still so much more to do for patients. So that's kind of what keeps me in the space. There's just yet more to do for patients every time. That just gets me feeling really passionate and excited.
There's something really powerful, right, Lynn, about spending your whole career in one single therapeutic area. You really start to see not just the science, but also where the system fails the patient.
Absolutely. And I would say, too, the trends in the space. I've also worked in asthma and COPD, which is more of a population health disease. In that disease, we have many different molecules that we use to treat patients. We often use drugs together in combination. Patients are routinely taking 3 or 4 different drugs, different mechanisms together to treat the disease. For me, it's a little bit of pattern recognition. On pulmonary fibrosis, we today have 3 drugs approved, but it's very difficult to use any of those drugs together in combination because each is very difficult to tolerate for patients. So I know how this story is going to go. I know that we want to do more for patients by being able to combine mechanisms, and it's owing to pattern recognition from these other diseases that I can see where this market can and should go.
And you're not the scientist founder type, right? Your background is more kind of corporate development, commercial. You've said that you do your best work at smaller companies where you can see and feel the impact that you're making day to day. So what was it about Avalyn that made you want to run this one?
I could see the opportunity here. So what we're doing at Avalyn is we're taking 2 of the drugs that have been approved in the market for about 10 years, and we're delivering them to the lung directly with an inhalation. And you summarized it really nicely at the outset there. What that does is it allows patients to stay on medicine, and it really addresses what is the rate limiter with the existing oral medicines, which is tolerability. You can drop the dose considerably as compared to the oral version. When I got to know the company and saw what the company was working on, I could very clearly see the potential. This was really a company that could deliver on that mission to actually impact patients and their disease and really help them with survival.
So it was a mix of really the science and the patient need, and of course the opportunity to company build. They all came together so beautifully and effortlessly, it sounds like. How do you think your commercial background makes you look at Avalyn differently than a scientist founder would?
I'm naturally a very strategic person. I can spot those opportunities in the marketplace where there's a dearth of options and where patients need more, and this is one of those. I try really hard to make patient unmet need an absolute core part of our strategies. We routinely talk to patients. We actually have a patient advisory council. Those patients are amazing. We meet them in person. We also talk to them at least quarterly. They review our protocols. They opine on different strategies we're going to take and expose them to our company more broadly. The whole company gets to meet and hear from actual patients with the disease and what they're suffering with and how they're living their lives and how serious the disease is gives us all as a team a real sense of motivation and mission. This work we're doing is not just day to day in front of a computer talking to each other. What we're doing is actually building drugs and programs that will actually save lives.
It's such a brutal disease, right, Lynn? Because even when people and patients do get treatment, a lot of the times the goal is to slow decline. Let's make this concrete. There's already drugs that are approved for pulmonary fibrosis. We mentioned that. So in plain English, what is Avalyn actually doing differently?
So the two drugs that have been approved for about 10 years are called pirfenidone and nintedanib, and they're only available as oral drugs. And as I mentioned, with nintedanib, they give you terrible diarrhea. With pirfenidone, terrible nausea and vomiting. And that's on top of the symptoms of the disease. So these patients are already quite sick and frail, breathless. They have issues with cough. They don't have enough exercise capacity because they can't get enough oxygen into their bloodstream. We're effectively asking patients on these oral drugs to suffer through and use their limited exercise capacity to go back and forth to the bathroom and deal with the consequence of the medicines. So it's for that reason that patients may start therapy, but they discontinue so quickly. What we're doing is we're taking those same drugs that we know work, but we actually are putting them into an inhalation and delivering them to the lung directly. When we do that, we can actually increase our exposure in the lung because we're putting more drug into the right compartment. And we're avoiding most of systemic exposure that you'd have with those oral drugs. So we're able to drop the dose considerably as compared to the oral version. Pirfenidone goes from 2,400 milligrams a day to 200 with the inhalation. When you're dropping the dose and putting it all in the right place, it largely resolves those tolerability concerns. So all of a sudden, you can take patients that weren't able to stay on medicine and keep them on medicine and allow them now to benefit from it over a longer term duration, which hopefully will help extend survival.
Right. And we'll talk about what you found from those that keep using it. But for those picturing this at home, what does inhaled actually look like for the patient day to day, as opposed to taking an oral pill?
It's a good question. When we're working on inhaled delivery, we have to think very carefully about the formulation itself, what patients can actually tolerate with an inhalation, and what part of the lung they're getting to. We have to formulate a particle size that is small enough to get to the right part of the lung. And not every inhaler can do that. We have to be very careful about the selection of an inhaler. In this case, we're using a device that's an approved device platform. It's the same device that Insmed uses for a drug called Arikayce. It's really reliable and is proven efficacious. It is great for patients because it emits this really soft, gentle mist. It's a nebulizer. So what that means is you put the handset part in your mouth and you're going to breathe in and out really slowly over the course of about 8 minutes on average. And that will deliver the drug to the lung directly. It's easy to breathe. These patients, again, have issues with cough and lung capacity. So just being able to breathe in a medicine is really not straightforward for this population.
And you hired people who worked on the original oral version of the drug at the company that invented them. Why was that important?
Yeah, important because there aren't a lot of people who've successfully developed drugs in pulmonary fibrosis. So having people that understood these molecules and how to study these patients correctly is absolutely critical to being able to drive effective clinical data. So very valuable. In our case, we benefit tremendously from that deep level of expertise and understanding of the marketplace.
Amazing. And here's the stat that stops people. And we spoke about this briefly before. There's only 2 drugs, like we said, approved for this disease. And both of them are oral pills. And they're so poorly tolerated. The research says that only 1 of US patients that take them stay on them. Can you tell me a little more about the long-term vision for Avalyn and how do things change once you start delivering the medicine directly into the lungs?
We can actually keep them on medicine. Right now with the orals, about 30% of patients at any one point in time are taking those drugs. The discontinuation rates quickly escalate just within the first few months. So most patients can't stay on beyond a few months. At a year, it's probably less than 10% of patients that are diagnosed with this deadly disease are taking those oral meds. With our program, we've had patients that have been on it beyond 5 years. So it's really remarkable to be able to keep patients on therapy, hopefully allowing them now to benefit from that efficacy over a much longer term horizon.
Is the goal to make the drugs more tolerable, or more effective, or both?
Ideally both, and the clinical data suggests both. But really, when we talk to doctors, the market need here is to just improve tolerability because it's the poor tolerability with the orals that is the rate limiter for adoption. We believe we'll be able to do that. And that if we can improve tolerability, then patients can benefit from the efficacy. So if we can actually improve efficacy as well, that would be really a game changer in the field.
if only about a third of patients actually stay on the drugs, what actually happens to the other 2/3 today?
They're not on any drugs for their disease, and then unfortunately they don't survive. Survival in this disease is 3 to 5 years. It's worse than most forms of cancer. So that's the urgency we all feel, is just trying to get patients on medicine and keep them on medicine, and then hopefully also make it possible to combine mechanisms. So we can put patients on multiple medicines because, as I mentioned earlier, we've learned in every other lung disease where we have better options like asthma, COPD, pulmonary hypertension, that we typically want to be putting multiple different drugs together to do more for patients.
And that is going to be such a hopeful vision of the future of treatment. Let's talk about your program. Your lead program, AP01, which is inhaled pirfenidone, as we spoke about, has now been studied in over 150 patients, some on it for more than 4 or 5 years. What has that data shown you that makes you confident and gives you conviction heading into your phase 2B trial?
When we look at the data at 1 year, we see on average stabilization of lung function. If we look at the data over 5 years or so in the population that stays on medicine, we still see stabilization of lung function. And importantly, we also have done imaging work in this program to actually look at the fibrosis in these patients' lungs on imaging and evaluate whether it's changing over time. And 70% of the patients that are on the high dose, we see either a stabilization of their fibrosis, or we actually see in some cases a reversal of their fibrosis, which is really remarkable, perhaps attributable to the fact that we're actually changing the underlying level of fibrosis in these patients' lungs, which then has an impact on their lung function.
Right. You learn so much from patients that stay on it for longer because you're able to really understand the data and see how it develops long term. I'm sure that would not be possible from a shorter study.
That's correct.
Heading into phase 2B, what is the biggest question that you want answered? What would be a real win for the field?
Yes, we're doing our phase 2B study now. It's a 1-year study, well-designed, well-powered, large enough. We're going to be looking for that data in the second half of 27. Our hope is that it's really going to show this demonstrable impact on improving tolerability. That's our base case. If we can show improved tolerability plus the stabilization of lung function on the efficacy side of the equation, that would just be a game changer for this field. It will make it possible now for literally the first time to keep patients on these medicines, allowing them to benefit from them, and hopefully streamlines the evolution of the treatment algorithm in the disease towards one where we can start using drugs in combination. There are other companies doing work in the field. We're genuinely hopeful those other companies will succeed. It's a rising tide lifts all boats. We can succeed together by hopefully giving patients now multiple different options, multiple different modalities that they can use in trying to do more for their disease.
That's amazing. So promising. There's something slightly counterintuitive about your strategy. You're taking proven drugs that have been proven to work, that are already approved, and you're reformulating them as opposed to chasing a brand new drug like traditionally you'd expect in drug discovery. Some people may see this as just a delivery tweak to an existing drug molecule. What are they underestimating about how hard this actually is and how it is a real bet?
It's incredibly difficult to formulate drugs for inhalation and to get the right particle size, to get to the right part of the lung. It adds tremendous complexity to the development pathway. People probably don't fully appreciate how challenging that is to do. We have some really interesting protections against generics. We have exclusivity in the device platform. And because of all those barriers to entry, it's actually very difficult for a generic company to compete. They would have to genericize drug itself plus the device, which they can't access because of our exclusivity. And then they would need to repeat the same large clinical studies to be able to get an approval. One inhalation to the next is actually completely different in terms of the deposition pattern, the particle size, the flow rate. And so you can't do a simple bioequivalence comparison of the two.
I think more people should understand this because it seems to me like the bet is not, does this existing medicine work? That's settled. It's, can we make it work better? Can we make it work with less systemic side effects, a better patient experience for the patients that are on it?
If a drug works but is not practical and patients can't stay on the medicine, then they're not going to use it and it's not going to impact the disease. For us, it's this focus on the patients and how to actually do better by them.
Agreed. And let's talk about the industry a little bit. So pulmonologists and patients have really entrenched ways of doing things, even when the current options are pretty rough and pretty limited. What's the biggest trust hurdle in switching a patient onto inhaled therapy, and what actually convinces a doctor to do that?
The data would convince a doctor to prove with the data that the drug and the approach works. But it's actually been very interesting when you talk to patients about this idea of inhaled delivery of a drug, they just naturally understand that it's going to go to their lungs. It seems to make them feel like they're doing something more actively to control their disease, almost like a positive feedback loop for them. We just haven't had any real pushback or hurdles amongst the patient community.
Do you find the kind of treatment naive patients a little easier to convince than those already on oral therapy?
Patients with this disease understand how serious oral drugs are to tolerate. And so they're quite incentivized to find something new that will help with the disease. That seems to be pretty equal across the populations.
Once a patient is on it, what makes them stay? And where do you tend to lose them?
We haven't lost many. That's been a positive experience so far. I expect there's something psychological, again, about doing something active for your disease, using this nebulizer twice a day, usually in the morning and the evening, gives you some energy, a little bit of peace, a little bit more feeling like you're doing something to actually affect your own outcome.
And of course, convincing patients and physicians is a completely different game to investors, right? You've just taken Avalyn public in the NASDAQ. Congratulations, in one of the biggest biotech IPOs of the year, raising around $345 million. And you've raised almost $1 billion across your career. That is incredible. What did investors need to see to back Avalyn in the middle of a market that hasn't been the easiest for biotech?
Great question. When investors think about this opportunity, I think there's a number of things that hit the right point. We have clinical data. We have a real idea that these drugs work. And I think the probability of success is high, given that we're using drugs that are approved and delivering them in a different way. We've built a just world-class team of experts in respiratory diseases and in inhalations. That matters a lot to really understanding how to do this the right way. We've got some near-term data catalysts that our phase 2s are reading out in the second half of next year. The commercial opportunity that we spoke about is just incredibly massive. About 300,000 patients per year diagnosed. The lowest brand pricing today in the marketplace is $150,000 per patient per year. So if every patient in the US, only in the US, was just on one medicine, that's a $42 billion market today. Forgetting about combinations. There's a lot of good here to do for patients in terms of their disease and real commercial value to be unlocked for a company. So I think it's a combination of those that they see and that they respond to.
Right. And the market is very different to the biotech market of 2020 or even 2021. It feels like capital now demands this focus and this discipline and the data that you mentioned earlier.
The clinical data, right? The fact that we're at clinical stage and we're doing phase 2 trials and we should have both phase 2s reading out late next year is near enough a catalyst that unlocks that IPO interest.
How does what public investors need to see differ from what your private backers wanted to?
It's actually, I think, very similar as companies progress and get to later stages of development. That's usually when they think about tapping into the public market. And it's largely because the quantum of capital that you start to need as you get into phase 3s and get towards approval starts to become just larger. Public companies just have access to more capital resources and larger financings. But in terms of what they're looking for, it's actually similar to the private investors that participated in our earlier stages of investment.
The data is data and it appeals to everyone, right? The evidence of the drug is there. Look at 5 to 10 years, right? If Avalyn and the general shift towards targeted inhaled therapies succeeds, what does treatment look like for a patient that's been newly diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis as opposed to how it is now?
Gosh, Martha, I love this question and I can go on and on, so I'll try not to. I dream a lot about what else we might be able to do with Avalyn. I think about companies like Insmed, which is another company in the respiratory space. The CEO there, he's just done a beautiful job of building that company into what it is now. I think we really have an opportunity here at Avalyn to do something similar. Beyond pulmonary fibrosis, there are so many more rare lung diseases that have literally nothing approved. There's so much more to do here. I get really excited about not only working on these current programs, but also about how we might grow beyond these into earlier stage programs that might also benefit different patients. For pulmonary fibrosis, we have the opportunity here to change this market and hopefully make it possible to extend survival for patients and for patients to start benefiting from multiple different modalities, multiple different therapies, different molecules. That alone should impact this market and these patients in a very dramatic way. That's really our hope for the future.
Would prevention or earlier detection of the disease also play a role here?
It's a really interesting question. And funny you ask. Some of the work we have on imaging, I mentioned the imaging work we've done earlier, it's suggesting to us that pirfenidone, which is one of our lead programs, may actually play a role in the very earliest part of this progression into fibrosis. That part of the fibrotic pathway, we call it ground glass. And that's where active inflammation is becoming fine fibrosis. Pirfenidone seems to play an outsized role in affecting that portion of the pathway. If that's true, to your point, it may tell us that we want to actually study pirfenidone, maybe even upstream of frank pulmonary fibrosis in a population that has a disease called interstitial lung disease. Those are patients that have remarkable inflammation that will progress and become fibrotic. We're hopeful that may give new options for how we actually can arrest that downward decline and perhaps prevent fibrosis from setting in the first place. More to learn about that, but something that we're definitely thinking about actively here.
That would be amazing. What a beautiful future for these patients. This is the perfect segue onto my quick fires. One myth about inhaled medicine that you'd like to kill in one sentence.
The myth is that the market is well served, and it's just not the case. Only about 10% of patients over the course of a year are staying on medicine.
One bet you're making about how pulmonary fibrosis will be treated differently in 5 years.
So the combination, allowing patients to step up to combinations by solving tolerability with inhaled delivery is critical to affecting their disease.
One part about how drugs get developed today that makes you think there has to be a better way.
There's an opportunity to think about doing it a better way by figuring out how to more effectively study combinations.
Let's see, very promising area with combinations in the future. Lynn, thank you so much for being here with me today. It truly was such a pleasure and an honor to have you be here with me and just unpack all of this with me. I think what's so incredible about Avalyn is, of course, the science, but also the practicality behind it. You're taking drugs that are proven to work, that doctors do understand, and you're reimagining how they're delivered to make treatment so much more tolerable for so many patients that are truly suffering from limited options at the moment. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you for having me. It's been a treat to speak with you and appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. And thank you all for tuning into Catalio Conversations. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share, like, comment, and subscribe. And please stay with us for more conversations with the founders and CEOs who are changing and shaping the future of innovative healthcare and AI. See you next time.